So here we're going to review dividing with decimals. And dividing with decimals is similar to how you do long division the normal way, but there's a couple of additional rules. So let's look here at this example here. So here we have 3.2 divided by 2. First thing you should do, you should estimate. You should say, well, how many times does 2 go into 3? Well, we know it goes in at least one time, so one and a little bit more. So it goes in about 1.5 times. If we were to divide 2 into 3. So that's a good estimate. So if my answer is that, then I know I'm on the right track. So remember the 3.2 goes underneath, because that's what we're dividing it into. And the divisor, the number we're dividing by, is going to be 2. So all I'm going to do is, the divisor here is just a regular number, not a decimal. So I'm just dividing it into a decimal. So all I have to do, the one rule is, I've got to put that decimal point where it is underneath that the decimal symbol there. So now I'm just going to do 2 divided into 3. Well, that's 1. 1 times 2 is 2. Subtract, and then bring down the 2. 2 goes into 12 6 times, and it goes to 0. So your final answer for this is going to be 1.6, which makes sense because it's close to 1.5. So you know you're on the right track. So that's how it works. Let's do a couple more. Same sort of rule here. 3.6 goes under that decimal house. That's what I like to call that thing, because that's what I'm dividing into. 4 is the number I'm dividing into. 4, how many times does 4 go into 3.6? Well, it doesn't quite go in, so my answer is going to be less than 1, but not by much. It's going to be less than 1. So my rule here is, again, I'm going to go ahead and put that decimal point right there because I'm dividing a whole number into a decimal. 4 goes into 3 0 times. 4 goes into 36 9 times. I got no remainder, so I'm done. So my answer for this problem is going to be 0.9, which makes sense because that's less than 1. Now we're going to start getting a little bit more complicated. In this case here, I'm dividing into a number that is a decimal, a whole number and a decimal, but I'm dividing a number that's a whole number and a decimal into it. So once again, we set it up the same way. It's going to look like this then. Underneath the decimal house goes the 5.5. So that's what I'm dividing into, and then the 1.1 goes on the outside. But one of the rules is that you cannot ever divide by a decimal. Now you're dividing by a decimal in this case here, so we have to change the way this looks. So the way I'm going to change, how I'm going to change this is, I'm going to move the decimal point here, I'm going to move the decimal point here. So when I do that, I'm moving over just one space for each of them, and it's going to give you an equivalent problem, but one that does not have a decimal anymore. So let's rewrite the problem. It's now 11. How many times does 11 go into 55? Well, it goes in 5 times. And let's do the estimate that we should have done at the beginning. How many times does 1 go into 5? Well, or 6. As that is an estimate, so it's going to be about 5. And that's what my answer is, 5. Now in this problem, again, I'm dividing by a decimal into a whole number. Now, since I'm dividing by a decimal, it's going to be, and the decimal is pretty small, it's definitely going to be bigger than 12. It's going to be quite a bit bigger than 12. So I want to make sure my decimal place is correct when I divide into it. So here I'm just going to set it up 0.2 divided into 12. Okay, now, unlike the last problem, when I move this over, I don't have a decimal point there, so I have to put the decimal point down because it's going to be at the end of the 12, because even though it's not written that way, we know the decimal point goes there because the 2 is in the ones place. So now I can write a 0 down here because I have 0 tenths, which is the same as no tenths. And that's an equivalent number, but now I'm going to move over one space here, going to move over one space here. And so now I'm going to rewrite the problem. I think it's really important to rewrite the problem because otherwise it can get kind of confusing. So now it's 2 into 120. How many times does 2 go into 120? Well, it goes in 0 times for the 1. Then it goes in 6 times for the 12. Then it goes in 0 times for the 0. So my answer is going to be 60. That makes sense because it's quite a bit bigger than what I said before, quite a bit bigger than that 12 when you divide that 0.2 into there. So that makes logical sense. And sometimes you might have to add more than 1 0. We'll see that in a minute. In this problem here, this is kind of a combination problem. The 3.4 goes underneath the house, right? You divide it by 0.4. So now you got to move over that decimal point here, move over the decimal point here. Let's rewrite the problem so it's 4 divided into 34. So how many times does 4 go into 34? Well, again, let's estimate that. 4 goes into 34 about a little bit over 8 times because 8 times 4 is 32. So my answer should be between 8 and 9 because 9 times 4 is 36. So 4 goes into 3 0 times. 4 goes into 34 8 times. Now I'm going to bring that down and subtract. So I have a 2. So now when we're doing decimal division, we want to keep going. I know that sometimes you might want to write down the problem as 8 with a remainder of 2. But when we're dividing by decimals, we're not going to do that. We're going to actually go ahead and add on an extra 0 here. And then I got to put the decimal point there because I want to keep going. I can keep adding zeros on provided there's a decimal point before the zeros I add on. So here, bring this down. Now I'm saying how many times does 4 go into 20? That goes in 5 times. So my answer is going to be 8.5, which is smack dab in the middle of the 8 to 9. So here's a problem where you're dividing a number by a much bigger number. So you know that the number is going to be less than 1. And quite a bit less than 1. So now I'm going to again put that 1.2 under the house and divide by 20. Okay, does 20 go into 1? I got to put that decimal up there first. Does 20 go into 1? Nope. Does 20 go into 12? No. Remember what I just said about adding a number? I can add that 0 there. Does 20 go into 120? Yes, it does. It goes in 6 times. So my answer is going to be 0.06. And there we are. That's how you divide with decimals. And sometimes, as I said, it takes adding some extra numbers after the decimal point. Sometimes you have to move over the decimal point. But just make sure to add that decimal point in the answer and make sure to check your answer because I know that this one here is much less than 1. So I know I'm on the right track.